Japan's Sanae Takaichi has made history twice over. She just led the Liberal Democratic Party to the nation's first post-war single-party supermajority after a landslide election victory. The stunning win came less than 4 months after she was sworn in as Japan's first ever female prime minister. Ms. Takaichi staked a job on the snap election she called last month, saying she would resign if the LDP failed to win a majority. Campaigning was shortened and there were fears tough winter weather would lead to a lower turnout. But Ms. Takaichi's bold and risky bet paid off. The LDP now has 316 of the 465 seats in the lower house of the Diet, and that rises to 352 if you include its coalition partner called the Japan Innovation Party. Prime Minister Takaichi has shown that she's less inclined to compromise quietly, which of course will have potential implications for key areas like the economy, immigration, foreign policy, and crucially, relations with China.
We will move up the timetable for revising the 3 strategic documents and fundamentally strengthen our national security policy. A nation must defend itself with its own hands. No one will come to the aid of a country that lacks such determination. We will steadfastly protect our nation's peace and independence, its territory, territorial waters, and airspace, and the lives and safety of all our citizens. A country that does not take on challenges has no future.
I'm Arnold Gay, and in this episode of the CNA Correspondent podcast, we asked CNA Correspondent Michiyo Ishida, what kind of country will Japan now become? Michiyo, always good to see you. Hello.
Nice to see you. Hi.
So let's start with, the margins, a super majority. We were talking about this. What kind of a majority turns out? A super majority. What does it say, about Japanese voters today? I mean, I sense, and I've come across reports which say the same thing as well, that, there is a change in the mindset of the Japanese voter. Perhaps they feel that nationalism is, okay, not a problem. They feel that, risk-taking should be rewarded. And I suspect, correct me if I'm wrong, there's an inclination, as seen in Ms. Takaichi, to be a little bit more assertive, maybe a little less polite, but certainly not rude.
Well, Arnold, it's clear that her message did come across, and the fact that she's a woman was positive for the Japanese public. And also, she's very clear in what she's been saying. Not, speaking in a very absurd way or unclear way like her predecessors. So that made a difference. And it's not really because of her nationalistic views that the public seems to be in support of her. What political watchers think, based on what I've been hearing and speaking to them, is Ms. Takaichi's LDP's landslide victory was due to her popularity. Period. Her popularity. Her cabinet's popularity rate has stayed around 60%, 60%. That's high. And compare that to her predecessor, Shigeru Ishiba, which was around 30%. Now, the age group that gave the strongest support to Ms. Takaichi were those between 18 to 29. 18 is the lowest eligible voting age in Japan. Now, major daily Sankei Shimbun suggested close to 90% of people in that age range in January supported her. And it's not really about nationalism, but more about populism. But if you speak to the older generation, then they would react differently. They would say, oh, Ms. Takaichi does share their view of a conservative stance.
So she's kind of made herself a prime minister for all of Japan, in a manner of speaking. So we know, she's been very public about what she intends to do with her very clear mandate. So the question I have is, how quickly is she going to do this? Is she going to take advantage, of the recentness of the win and go full speed? Or is she going to do more of the Japanese thing, which is to be cautious and move slowly.
Well, as a result of this past general election, she did gain a strong majority in the lower house of parliament. But she needs the support from opposition parties. The LDP does not have a majority in the upper house, so she needs cooperation from other parties. And literally, with a 2/3 majority in the lower house, if bills are rejected in the upper house, she can take the bills back to the lower house and push them through. Still, taking matters in full speed is not a good idea. Now, let me give you an example of what she intends to do. She wants to reduce sales tax of 8% from food products and beverages for the next 2 years. And for that, she wants to assemble a meeting attended by representatives of various parties to discuss how to achieve this, including how to fund social welfare if sales tax is reduced. And this may not be so difficult to achieve because many political parties want sales tax to be reduced or even lifted. The more controversial would be stepping up Japan's defense capability by revising the National Defense Strategy document. And this is what she wants to do this year.
So if I were to go back to the issue of, a new Japan being slightly more assertive compared to previous administrations, where, is this assertiveness going to show up the most? You talked about the economy, the consumption tax, you talk about defense as well. Are those the two where we're going to see a bit more assertiveness and perhaps a bit less predictability?
Well, we actually do have to wait and see. It's about whether electorates will become concerned as she carries out policies. And the public, has the right to vote against her in coming elections. The next major election will be in 2028, and that will be the upper house election. But up until then, there will be rural elections such as gubernatorial, mayoral, local assembly elections, and the public can give their verdict through such elections. The one policy which is the most worrying perhaps is she wants to slap an so-called espionage law. And analysts worry the government might violate privacy of citizens. She didn't mention a timeline for this, but if she comes out and tries to go through with this, perhaps the public will start to react negatively towards her.
Michiyo, you talked about how the LDP is in control of the upper house. I'm wondering, whether or not there is, complete unity, among the LDP in the first place. I mean, going into the Sunday's election, there was talk that she needed to unite the party, and she didn't actually have the full backing of the lawmakers in the LDP.
Well, she did produce her political pledges as a manifesto. And that means her candidates had to run under this manifesto in the lower house election. And she did try to please her party heavyweights by endorsing those who were suspended from the party due to their slush political fund scandal. And most of them, around close to 40, won a seat in the latest election. And they are all aware the public voted for Ms. Takaichi rather than for the LDP. So LDP's approval rating was around 30%, according to media polls, and that's half of that of Ms. Takaichi's approval rating, which was around 60%. So LDP members are well aware that it's because of her they were able to win seats, and for that reason, they should unite under her.
I want to go back to the the area which possibly is a top priority, which is the economy and reducing the cost of living, for Japanese. I believe that's a key campaign promise. You've spoken about calling meetings to talk about the suspension of consumption taxes. We know she's a disciple of Abenomics, and obviously the stock market loves, that she's been elected. We've seen, record rises in the Nikkei 225. So I'm wondering, how buoyed is she, by the market on the one hand, by her victory on the other hand, and how will this translate into her pushing stimulus programs and tax cuts without alarming the bond markets, which we know are a little bit concerned.
Well, in a way, she's been consistent. She has stressed again and again she will undertake a responsible, aggressive fiscal spending to spur the Japanese economy. And she said if the government invested, it will help companies develop their technology, sell them to various markets, help raise wages, and the people with higher wages will spend, creating a positive cycle. She wants to promote a strategic investment specifically on economic security, food security, energy, resources, health and medicine, cybersecurity on AI, semiconductor, quantum, nuclear fusion, bio, aerospace shipbuilding. And these are actually her 17 key areas she wants to focus on. There's been concern that she's been commenting too much on the currency, which has not been good for the already weak Japanese yen, which has been translating into higher prices on imported goods. And Japan imports a lot of its resources from overseas. So the comment on the currency has been one worrying factor about her.
Michiyo, I want to ask you about immigration. Fairly or unfairly, rightly or wrongly, some Japanese associate immigration with a lack of jobs, their own difficulties in the job market.
A big challenge for the LDP going into this election was the rise of a populist party, Sanseto, that had captured a significant share of the vote in the previous upper house election last summer. And so for Takaichi, a critical objective here is to try to grab back those right-leaning voters and bring them back into their traditional fold in the LDP. And it looks like that so far she has achieved some degree of success there. But that also means from a policy standpoint that the LDP has, to a large extent, embraced an agenda that suggests that immigration has been, Japan has been too welcoming for immigration and that more restrictions need to be placed on immigration, tourism, and so forth.
So my question now is, how is she going to approach, this sensitive topic? Because we know that Japan is highly dependent on foreign labor.
Prime Minister Takaichi wants to step up immigration control, and she claimed there are those who are not paying tax and those who are not paying into Japan's social insurance system. And on the purchase of real estate, foreigners can purchase land in Japan. She wants to revise that rule and to make sure purchase does not interfere with Japan's security, for instance, that they're not buying land near Japan's defense bases, for example. And gaining permanent residency in Japan could be stepped up, more strict than ever, and gaining Japanese nationality too. And actually, I've been trying to help a friend gaining permanent residency, but it's taking a long time, and it could be because she's now in power.
But is there anything, she might do to make sure that she doesn't actually choke off this important source of labor and workers?
Well, she has not been saying anything about closing doors completely because businesses do need foreign workers. Japan's population is falling, and those above the age of 65 are close to 30% of Japan's population. So without foreign workers, it will be very difficult to sustain Japan's population or Japan's economy. She's talking about developing AI, robotics, but how fast could that happen?
So is she going to double down on China, Michiyo? Her comments on Taiwan annoyed Beijing. We know that. But I'm curious, what are her true goals with the mainland? I cannot believe it's confrontation. And this is a key question, that I suppose many Japanese would be asking, the Chinese would be asking as well, and not to mention, all of Japan's Asian neighbors.
Right. Well, okay, officially, she's been saying in her news conference that she stands by a mutually beneficial strategic ties for stability with China. Now, this mutual agreement was formed between Japan and China back in 2006, between then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and then President Hu Jintao. She said there are issues of concerns between the two countries, but if there are, it's important to address them, and she is open to have dialogue with China. And she said there is talks continuing with China. Remember, it was in November when she was asked in the diet session what action she would take in the event of a Taiwan contingency. And she hinted of a possibility of exercising collective self-defense, and that angered China. And China then called for its citizens to refrain from traveling to Japan. Chinese airlines suspended flights to the rural parts of Japan, not necessarily to Haneda and Narita Airport. China decided to stop exporting materials which Japan could use to build its defense capabilities. And Japan was worried that this could include rare earth materials. Ms. Takaichi started to say, we're not going to depend on one country, and started to seek to develop or to procure its own rare earth materials in Japan, for example. So at this point, there is no sign she is going to double down.
Okay. What about Article 9? This is an issue of concern as well. Two countries in Asia, some of which have had histories, if you like, with Japan. She's talked about revising Article 9, and I'm curious, how is she going to sell it? First of all, domestically, because we know some Japanese still believe that Article 9 should not be revised or abolished in any way. And there are questions as well among Japan's neighbors, questions of, I suppose, what happens? Is Japan now going to build up its military and take back its previous announcement of war?
Okay, maybe I should quote a little bit Article 9 so our viewers or listeners can understand. It states the Japanese people forever renounce war as the sovereign right of the nation and the threat or use of force as a means of settling international disputes. And in order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces will never be maintained. Well, Ms. Takaichi seems to be very strongly for, making the self-defense force as a legal entity, because many scholars think that just the existence of the self-defense force is a violation of the Constitution. So this will be one area she will probably work on. Mm-hmm. But other areas, we're not really sure at this point yet, because she has been saying that we want the party members to deliberate first before, they put forth on what revision will be suggested. In any case, she needs 2/3 support in both the lower and upper houses of parliament for a national referendum to revise the Constitution. And this is not going to be easy. Now, let's hear from Mr. Kurt Tung, former U.S. ambassador to the Asia Pacific.
I would expect that she'll take an early trip to the region to both express Japanese enthusiasm for showing leadership region-wide on areas where a middle power can make constructive contributions. I mean, she's from the school of thought, the Abe Shintaro school of thought, her mentor and role model. Mm-hmm. And remember, Abe was not just the person who revived Japanese defense capabilities and found a way around the Constitution to become a more normal country in terms of power projection. He's also the person that kept the Trans-Pacific Partnership alive after the U.S. pulled out.
Shinzo Abe is actually, Ms. Takaichi's mentor. And Mr. Abe's ideas will actually be reflected in this revised constitution.
Takaichi is Japan's first female prime minister, but it's said that her record on gender issues is mixed at best. I wonder if that's going to change.
Well, Arnold, she doesn't mention about promoting gender equality. She does not support the freedom of choosing, for instance, separate surnames. Currently, more than 90% of Japanese women choose their husband's surname. And the business community here, including the biggest, which is the Japan Business Federation, has been calling to change the law. So professional women can work under the name she was born with or the name she wants to work under. But Ms. Takaichi has been saying she will allow women to use her maiden name and married name at the same time. This is, the Federation said this is really confusing. What about passports? This is going to also confuse the international community. And regarding the imperial succession, Emperor Naruhito has only a daughter, Princess Aiko. But according to the imperial house law, only men can be the imperial successor. Miss Takaichi wants to sustain the tradition. So what is going to happen to the imperial household? And, you look at public opinion polls, it shows that many actually support the ascendance of Princess Aiko as the reigning empress to the chrysanthemum throne.
So would you say, though, that it's still possible that she might review this, and it's lower down on her priorities, or do you think it's pretty much set in stone for her?
I think pretty much set in stone for her because that's the way she is. She is a woman, but she thinks like a conservative man, actually.
Okay. I want to continue with, if you like, the softer aspects, of the changes which may be forthcoming. So I want to talk about, Japan's social and cultural atmosphere, if indeed, Sanae Takaichi goes ahead and, brings about this wave of change that people talk about and changes the norms previously associated with Japan. I mean, are we looking, domestically, how people perhaps might be, I don't know, a little bit less restrained, a bit more, proud of what their country is like, and looking in from outside Japan, what could the world see in this new Japan?
It's really too early to say at this point in time. It seems to be like a gamble. She could break Japan further with her aggressive fiscal spending. Japan's national debt is already more than double its GDP. And let's say her aggressive spending does not bear fruit. What happens to Japan? It could become a nightmare. But if Japan does become a strong nation, as she wants Japan to become, with improvement of its food security, energy security, cyber security, etc., as she's been aiming for, then of course it will be a positive, strong Japan. At any rate, now with a strong mandate, and that's in the lower house, she can push through bills, but it is just the beginning of Takaichi Japan. So we will have to wait and see what happens. And as much as her hand in the economy will be closely watched, next, I think Japan and the world will also be watching closely at how she approaches U.S. President Donald Trump. They are expected to meet in Washington next month. And, it's to be seen how Mr. Trump will react to the importance of U.S.-Japan alliance and his commitment to Asia, generally speaking.
Michiyo, always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
That's it for our lower house, Japan lower house election discussion. We thank you very much for joining us as well. The CNA Correspondent podcast was brought to you by Clara Ong and Zikri Ayman. You can also find all this on YouTube. Till next time, bye-bye.